Namaste, and welcome to Vedic Vidya. My name is Jeffrey Armstrong, Kavindra Rishi. Vedic Vidya is available exclusively on Chitty Media English channel on Thursday and Sunday nights, 7 p.m. IST. Our topic tonight is Indian inventions and philosophies that were stolen by the West, or how our modern world was shaped by India. Whenever we're talking about history, we have to be careful to remember that it was our ancestors who were participating at that time, and we're supposed to make progress now. So this retrospective is not to create animosity between current cultures or people. It is instead the essence of the saying, those who do not study history are bound to repeat it. We are supposed to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, from the things that they have done that caused harm, embarrassment, or desecration to other civilizations. And right now, I would propose to you, we are emerging in a new renaissance of recognition that we've been living in the world by rape and pillage rather than by cooperation. And now that we're so powerful throughout the world, cooperation is the only way there will be a future. And this means compromise in certain regards, but it means more than anything, respect. And that's what this is. So I want to say it one more time to everyone listening. Namaste means I want to stay in a balanced, respectful relationship, and I see you as a divine being who's immortal, who is visiting here, just like I am. We are all, in that regard, the same beings, similar in essence. With that in mind, I'm going to talk about some inflammatory topics that have not been discussed. And that means there could be people still perpetrating them. When you learn this knowledge, it will help you to decide that we need to stop treating each other this way. And right now, we don't have a good track record for the last 300 years. So our topic today is to do justice to the culture of India, because the English-speaking colonizing world did not. In fact, they desecrated India, robbed and pillaged, took whatever they could, took ideas, inventions, wealth, everything they could take, they took without a thank you, and more importantly, without giving credit. Now, I do want to give you a term that I like to use, which is sincere religions gone rogue. I consider the forms of Islam and Christianity that went rogue and desecrated the world to not be representing their prophets correctly. I do not believe Muhammad wanted to see that. I do not believe Jesus or Moses or any of those prophets in Abrahamic religions wanted to see the world raped and pillaged in the name of that religion. So when you hear me saying who originated something in history, it is not to be disrespectful to those traditions in their genuine and sincere form. I have friends amongst all of them, as we all should. But no one should, in the name of the truth, steal, rob, pillage, arrange to denigrate and desecrate anyone's culture. And as we now are starting to grasp, not for skin, not for gender, not for political purpose, not for any excuse should we treat ourselves and the rest of the residents of our planet in a despicable way. That's the caveat. That first. Now, the truth. The truth is that India is an ancient civilization, tens of thousands of years older than anything the rest of our world has a clear and written record on. And India has a clear and written record of that ancient history, with ancient texts that include the astronomy of the sky at the time that they were spoken and later written. And they're spoken in the most perfect language that exists on our planet right now for anyone to gather evidence from. And none of this has been spoken publicly so that the whole world understands it. Now again, You should not think of this politically. You must look at me first and say, is this person the standard Hindu? Am I talking to someone from Bharat, from India, who is a Hindu this or a Hindu that? No. Am I in a sect? No. Have I joined a religion? No. But there is a library of knowledge in India that has been feeding the world like a generous mother for thousands and thousands of years. And the way it was done was along something called the Silk Road, which went all the way from India across through into places in Europe, across as far as China. And in the course of these talks, we're going to discuss this more and more. How, just imagine fragments of gold being carried throughout the world. And imagine that there was this trading route, and we all went up and down it. And when we did, we shared things. Well, after 1,000 years, those shared things were naturally woven into the culture of a region. Let me give you a good example. The word Russia is from the Sanskrit word rishi. It's rishya. A rishi means a seer or a yogi or someone with profound wisdom. And so the rishis of India used to go to what we now call Russia, build a monastery, go there and meditate. At that time in history, it was a beautiful place for them to go. So the name stuck, the memory faded. I want you to think of this as the same principle here. Knowledge has been coming out from India to us, but we either purposely, in the case of the colonizers, or accidentally or ignorantly didn't know where it had come from. But because there's a historical record, I can actually share these things with you. So let's start with advanced mathematics. I'll tell you an interesting secret. Did you know that the Greeks hated zero, refused to work with it, left it out of all of their mathematical thinking? Because zero seemed repugnant to them for some reason. Philosophically, they didn't like it. And yet zero was used in India as the basis of mathematics, as it now has come to be in our modern times. Binary mathematics, in fact, came from India. From the Rig Veda, there are several verses that show us the logic behind binary mathematics. Now, I won't go into that, but basically, ones and zeros is a yes-no, and a yes-no in the architecture of computers allows them to be objective with no maybe. No maybe means precision, and everything goes on with precision from there because it's binary. Gateways. It's actually three choices, and, nor, or not. But this system originated in the Rig Veda, one of the Vedic texts, as an aphorism on mathematics that was later extrapolated upon and is the basis of science as we know it and technology as we know it. Well, all we need to do now is say, oh, you mean that wonderful binary mathematics that came from India? That was their property for tens of thousands of years before. That. So that's the first. I think that advanced mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, all of the things we're now using, including science as a subject, had their origins in this profound, thoughtful culture who honored being learned above all else and compassionate. And now we've spoken briefly about it, but this is otherwise known as the Sanskrit language. So I'll just give you a few understandings about the Sanskrit language. What makes it perfect? Some of you probably speak Romance languages aside from English. I do, a little bit. Yo hablo poquito de español. I don't have más vocabulario. I can't speak it conversationally with brilliant people who speak Spanish. But Spanish is just a form of Latin. And so is Italian, and so is Portuguese, and so is French. And the English language is composed especially of French. So the many cultural exchanges, I won't even call them wars, but the historical cultural exchanges that went back and forth between the various cultures led to a progression of languages down to what we know now as cultural languages of a country, modifications of Latin. So you'll notice that in Spanish, there's an infinitive form of the verb, tener, to have. Then yo tengo, I have. Tú tienes, you have. That's called conjugating the verb. Now, in Latin, in order to do that, you must conjugate the noun and the verb at the same time, and then they address each other, and it locks the meaning in more specifically. That's why calling this my forearm is not as precise as calling it my extensor digitorium profundus. That's Latin. Now, the Greek shared that in its own particular way, so Greek and Latin have a lot in common. They're cousins, they're near cousins. But what no one has been told in their schooling is what the most precise language is and why. So, very simply, in Sanskrit, there are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And each of those, when you create a Sanskrit sentence, receives a case ending to show agreement between the four. The four must agree for a sentence to be completely meaningful and precise. Now, behind that is something called dhatus, or roots. Those roots are the roots of words, and every word has a root. If you follow a word back to its root, that's called etymology. So if you follow words historically back, they'll show you a trail across Europe, across Asia, across different places, around the world even, showing that seafaring was going on. And as you trace this back, you'll go back to languages that were more precise. That precision was considered a sign of intelligence and scientific understanding. There is no argument amongst linguists that India, therefore, is the place where this process ends and begins. There is no other language on the planet that can be shown to be the source of Latin and Greek, and therefore most of the European languages and so forth. And this has not been taught to us in our schools. I was an English major and a poetry, literature major in university. I never heard a word of this. Only linguists in training would know that Sanskrit is somewhere in the background, but guess what? The colonizing Western individuals, and especially the ones that spoke English, especially at Oxford, there's a dictionary coming from Oxford called the Oxford Etymological Dictionary, and it does not include references to Sanskrit. It stops at Greek. Because if you're colonizing a culture, it's inconvenient to talk about it and give it credit. So let's move to another topic, seafaring, traveling around the world. Well, here's one thing for certain, that this is historically well understood amongst scholars, that 2,000 years ago, the time supposedly, if it was true, when the personage Jesus was living and on the ground, at that time in Rome, there were 150 ships a year going back and forth between Rome and India. 150 ships a year, 2,000 years ago. Whoever told you about that in history class? It's inconvenient. That means that thousands of people from India were living in Rome at the time that that seafaring and trading was going on. And here's another secret. The Romans were terrible at seafaring. They really hated it. So it wasn't Roman ships that were going. It was ships from India that were going back and forth to Rome, not the other way around. And those ships, and the ships that the Chinese had learned to make, probably collaborating with India, because that's another topic for our conversation. China and India have been collaborating by their own admission for at least 7,000 to 10,000 years, but no doubt much longer. But at least that long, along what we call the Silk Road. Knowledge was going back and forth, and China acknowledges that that knowledge came from India. Now, seafaring, again, just a hint here, there's a book you can read called How America Was Discovered in 1421 by China. Whoever told you in history class that China took ships and went to America before Columbus? It's historically completely proven. And they went up and down the West Coast. It's because, and those ships were 1,000 feet in length and held a couple of thousand people. There was a fleet of many of them that were sent out. You could have made the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria rowboats on those ships. They were 1,000 feet long, 3 football fields in length with 1,000 people, double-hulled teak wood, fully provisioned for 3 months at sea. Anyone teach you this in high school? I didn't think so. Too bad. Me either. So this is a time in history when history is coming forward. So let's now look at music. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So, do. What if we say it differently? Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa. Sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, re, sa. That's the Sanskrit scale and English scale. So that scale came from where? How do we know? Well, if you know all those notes and you can go back and forth skillfully, it's called running the gamut. The whole gamut. You go across all the notes. But gamut is a Sanskrit word. Sa, re, ga, ma. So ga, ma is the 2 notes from the scale, and ut means to go beyond. So gamut is Sanskrit. Sa, re, ga, ma, sa, da, ni, sa, ut. All the notes. Follow that sequence. Running the gamut is Sanskrit. Music came from India. Not just music. Everyone banged an instrument somewhere in the world, but actually the theory of music, the notation of music, and this is why, in case you don't know this, the guitar and the piano have chords or have set positions for the notes, and it's a 12-note scale. The Indian scale, the scale of music in India, is 22 notes with quarter tones and third tones, whereas the Western scale is half tones. You can go a half a step. So with a guitar, and I play guitar, you go up the frets and you move in half-step intervals, playing a bar chord or playing anything. Now, I also played sitar for part of my life, and the sitar has 18 sympathetic strings, 7 strings that you play, curved frets, and movable frets. So there are at least 80 different ways to tune a sitar. When you play the sitar, you can go up an entire scale of notes simply on one string by bending it across the curved frets. This means in every way it's a superior instrument. It can do everything a guitar or piano can do, only that times 100, with resonance coming from its sympathetic strings. Next on our list is architecture. Look at the buildings built in India. Have you noticed the similarity between those built in Central America and South America? Well, that's because they're the same architects. It's very clear. And we already covered that seafaring was going on, whether it was China or India, for many, many years before Europe ever got in the game. So you can be sure that that similarity of architecture is because architecture was one of the great sciences in India, and their mathematics and astronomy means it was always aligned with the stars. It's provable that the architecture in South and Central America, as well as that in India, was aligned astronomically with the movements of the stars. Therefore, we can tell over time when they were built. And last but not least, martial arts. I've studied many forms of martial arts myself. It's a well-known historical fact that Da Mo, a famous traveler, brought martial arts from India, from South India, to China in the 6th century BC. And that knowledge of martial arts became the Kung Fu. So look how brilliantly the Chinese developed it. Should we say that Kung Fu is entirely from India? No. The seeds of that culture was taken to them, taught to them by a master of a martial art, and then in turn, they perfected that to a very high degree. These days, martial arts in China are immensely more sophisticated than the ones currently in public practice in India. And this is partly the way history goes. One culture plants a seed, the other culture gets the benefit. We need to learn how to honor all these great cultures. Next is medicine, and medicine has two texts in India. I'll just mention their names. One is the Charaka Samhita. It's the ancient medical text, 6th century. About the same time, the first surgical text in the world, the Sushruta Samhita, was also developed in India, written and took form. That text on surgery included operations for cataracts. So, in the 6th century BC, there was a book in India that codified surgery of all kinds with stainless steel instruments and cataract surgery amongst them. Who told us that in our history of medicine in the world? And that and many other miraculous things came from India that were medical and the basis of what we now call medicine and surgery. Again, rooted there. Have modern developments happened? Yes. Should we honor them? Of course. Honor knowledge wherever we see it. But we've got to start honoring these ancient civilizations, indigenous civilizations around the world, for their brilliance, for their wisdom, and just as humans. So last of all, yoga and religion are the same thing, except religion is chunks of yoga that were borrowed by people along the Silk Road. Whatever the historical person, if there was one, Jesus spoke, whatever Mohammed knew, who was a trader along that Silk Road, they had gone to all of the places and met people from all of the places we're talking about. This means people from India went up and down the Silk Road for thousands of years, sharing their knowledge and their culture, generously, not colonizing, acculturating. Because in the case of the Vedic knowledge of India, that is the way you do it. So pieces of truth from India, from the Vedic library, think of them as pieces of gold. They're shining bright, always illuminating. That knowledge traveled up and down the Silk Road. And if you have a piece of gold in your culture right now, if you have a religion, you got the fundamentals of that religion from India. If you know a method of meditation, the fundamentals of that came from India. That's why those of us, like myself, not born there, in our quest for knowledge, have ended up there. I didn't start out life Hindu, but I started out with some very sweet Christian friends. And at the same time, they couldn't answer the questions that I had, even as a young man. So I said, well, what you have is lovely, thank you. But don't try to force it on anyone. My church didn't. But I said, thanks for that, I appreciate it, but that's not enough. I need more answers. I need more truth. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Vedic Vidya means shining the light of truth. Tune in to Vedic Vidya on the Chitty Media English channel Thursday and Sunday nights at 7 p.m. IST. My name is Kavinder Rishi, Jeffrey Armstrong. See you next time, and have a Namas day.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.